Gandalf the Grey, healing extraordinaire and PvE tile-taking machine. So good that nobody can pass him up in the early game. In this video, I'll provide a breakdown on how to build him to make him an exceptional commander and give yourself the early game edge. So, the basics on Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf the Grey is a tier 2 commander available from Season 1. You can increase his respect and recruit him either by gaining his invitation or by collecting the Old Wynyard's respect item. The best way to get Gandalf in Season 1 is to open the Fellowship of the Ring chest available at the very start, which grants 3 Old Wynyards for every 5 chests you open, so he can be recruited very quickly. As a commander, he is one of the Maya, which is an immortal spirit designed to keep balance over Middle-earth, similar to Radagast and Saruman. In-game, he comes with a support skill, meaning at level 20 you gain an additional 25 focus and 5 more skill points. The game also defines him as a good all-round commander, so he does not specialise in any particular race of troops, and he has some healing skills, and that's putting it lightly. His base might is low, at only 128, and also only increases by 1 every level. His focus, however, is very strong, with a base value of 216, increasing by 2.4 every level. Similar to his might, his speed is also very poor, with a base value of 84, increasing by 0.82 every level. Therefore, you can see that his stats are primarily designed to have high focus and reduce the damage dealt to his armies. His Respect 10 item is the Wizard Smoking Pipe. This requires you to occupy Durin's Tower, own 1 fine smoking pipe, and also use Gandalf to fight a Balrog 3 times. The base stats of this are granting you 22 focus and 1 HP to your army, which when maximised will grant 66 focus and your army 3 HP. The bonus effect of this item is the Leader of the Free Folk, which grants all units a 2.5% damage reduction, 9% when maximised, if your army consists of units of 3 different races. In my opinion, as far as T2 unique items go, this one is fairly mediocre, as I feel like a fine smoking pipe is actually a more effective item on Gandalf the Grey, so I wouldn't recommend wasting your mithril on this. Now, into his skill tree. His first Respect 1 skill tree opens with the Grey, which grants a 50% chance of 1 unit recovering HP when Gandalf himself deals damage. This begins at 6.6% recovery and gets to 100% recovery if 15 skill points are allocated. In addition, when maximised, you get 15 more focused. This is one of the best available healing skills for any commander, and so will be the bedrock of keeping your troop alive, and will be the main focus of this build. The important thing to remember is that he heals your troops every single time that he as the commander deals damage. So the first sub-skill for the Grey is called Fleeting Movements. This gives a 10.7% chance, or 75% when maximised, for 2 allied units to avoid the next instance of damage, and it activates every 3 turns. The second sub-skill of the Grey is called Blindside, which deals 16.2% focus damage modified by the focus stat, increasing to 115% with 7 skill points. This also inflicts a 1-round stun. This skill activates every 3 rounds, similar to Fleeting Movements. The bottom rank 0 skill tree, its primary skill is Mithrandir. This debuffs enemy troops so they lose 0.7% damage for the first 4 rounds. When maximised, this increases to 11% damage, and you also buff your own troops so they avoid the first instance of damage in every battle. The first sub-skill of Mithrandir is Free Peoples. This buffs your units to receive 2% less damage, or 14% when maximised, but only for the specific races listed. The second sub-skill is called Convener, and as mentioned in my Elrond build, this is one of the best skills available for any commander. Not only does it grant initiative, so that your units act first, but also gives you a chance for follow-up, so that you can attack twice in a round. This begins at a 10.7% chance, increasing to 75% when 7 points are allocated, and this skill is active for the first 2 rounds. Gandalf's Respect 3 tree begins with a skill called the Wizard. This skill hits 2 enemy units with a 1-round stun, and also debuffs their defense for 3 rounds. This debuff is 3.3 defense points per skill point, up to 50 points when 15 skills are allocated. When maximised, you also gain an additional 15 focus. The first sub-skill for Wizard is not great. It grants 2% focus with the cost of being 1 less point of might for each skill point allocated. The bottom sub-skill is called Surge, which inflicts a 21.4% or 150% when maximised focus damage attack twice, each time hitting a separate target. And Gandalf's final skill tree, his rank 5 skill tree, is the commonly seen White Council. This grants a reduction for all allies to the first 3 instances of damage up to 19%. When maximised, it also grants an additional damage instance avoidance. The top sub-skill of this tree is High Alert, which reduces focus, burn and poison damage by up to 50%. And lastly, the bottom sub-skill is Champion of Light, which buffs damage against orcs, urukai and trolls by 4% per allocated skill point. So, now into my recommended build for PvE. As the intention of this build is to take tiles with minimal losses, of course we'll be focusing primarily on how we can avoid damage and heal as much as possible. On that note, I recommend putting 15 points into the first R1 tree skill, the Grey. This is so we can maximise the healing potential of Gandalf, and we'll be specifically skilling and equipping Gandalf to make the most of this skill. And on that note, we'll also put 1 point into the sub-skill, the Blind Side. The reason we are putting only 1 point into this is to initially get that stun that activates every 3 rounds, but also to provide Gandalf with another instance of damage. So when he hits this small amount of focus damage, it has a 50% chance of activating the Grey and providing our units with more healing. And finally, for this skill tree, we will also place 7 points in the top sub-skill, Fleeting Movements. This gives us a 75% chance to avoid damage on rounds 3, 6 and 9. So you'll see that from this combination of skills, we now have a chance to avoid damage in those 3 rounds, and also because of Blindside stunning every 3 rounds, they'll be stunned on rounds 4, 7 and 10. So this 2 combination of skills alone provides either stun or a high chance of avoidance for 6 of the 10 rounds. But we aren't done there. We'll next put 15 points into the bottom R0 skill, Mithrandir. This will give us yet another avoidance, this time to the first instance of damage on each of our units, and in addition, the opponent, on the few times they can deal damage, will deal it with an 11% damage debuff. And the last of the R0 skill tree we're going to put points into for now is to put 7 points into Convener. This is for the aforementioned initiative and the high chance to follow up in the first 2 rounds. This is because when combined with the debuffs, the stuns and our avoidance, we should be able to, with follow-up as well, get a very good early game advantage, therefore meaning that we kill off almost all the opponent's troops before they even have a chance to hit us. For Gandalf's Respect 3 tree, we're going to put 2 points only into the Wizard. This is because we're looking to inflict yet another stun, this time in round 1, and also reduce the opponent's defense for 3 rounds, essentially softening the enemy troops up, while hopefully we deal double damage with Convener and also get a stun, so once again they're unlikely to hit us. The reason we put 2 points into this rather than just a single one is so we can put 1 point into the Surge sub-skill. The reason we want this skill is not really for the small amount of damage it deals, but because it's 2 more instances of damage that Gandalf can deal. So therefore 2 more opportunities for the Grey to activate and Gandalf to heal up our troops. This is essentially the core of the build. So for those of you in early seasons, you only require him to be Respect 3 to be truly effective at tile taking. With the additional skill points you have remaining, you have a few options as to where you want to put them. You have the option to put them into Free Peoples for a very consistent damage reduction on all your units, up to 14% with those 7 skill points. If you have Gandalf Respect 5, you could also choose to put these into White Council to again reduce damage that you receive, but in early rounds. I'll leave that decision up to you. The end result of this skill combination is we have the opponent stunned for 4 of the 10 rounds with a 75% chance of avoiding damage in another 3 rounds. They also have a debuff to their damage and their defense during the rest of the rounds. All the meanwhile, we are healing a crazy amount when the opponent does do damage. It makes for a very potent combination, particularly when the opposition is just tile armies, so they don't have specific counters to your units, such as stun resistant armour or pursuit. Following that, we're going to now look at the equipment that I would recommend, both flawless and exquisite, for Gandalf the Grey. Again, we will be trying to focus this equipment to make the most of the skills that we've just recommended. First up is flawless gear. So for the weapon, I would recommend the Carver with the Smite buff. This weapon is best because it's the best weapon for increasing Gandalf's focus and also buffs the attack of men units, which you'll see later in troop compositions can be very useful. However, primarily the Smite effect is the most useful part. This because there's a 35% chance of another instance of dealing focus damage, which will once again activate the Grey and give our units some healing. If you do not have this available, a weapon such as the Cutlass with Smite or Mirkwood Bow with Pierce will do, just to get that extra instance of damage, though the Carver is optimal because it also increases Gandalf's focus. Armour-wise, there are a fair few choices, but my personal preference is the Quilted Armour with either Focus Protection or the Attunement skill. The Quilted Armour provides focus, which will boost Gandalf even more, and Focus Protection will help you reduce damage versus a few tile commanders that deal focus damage, though Attunement is probably better for the additional focus that it grants. For headgear, the Trapper's Hood would be the most effective in my opinion. This is because it provides additional attack to your ranged units, so you can deal more damage, whilst if you get one with the Hysteria effect, you have a chance to inflict madness upon your opponents, meaning they have a chance to deal damage to their own armies instead of your own. So obviously, on the few rounds they actually can attack through stuns and avoidance, they could then also end up hitting their own armies, so it's just yet another chance for your units not to take any damage. Finally, for an accessory, I would recommend the worn out smoking pipe mentioned earlier, with the Sustain effect. Sustain provides regular healing, reducing troop losses, and the pipe itself provides a large amount of bonus focus. The legendary equipment I recommend follows very much the same template. For the weapon, I would recommend the Noldor sword with the Mind Split bonus. This sword performs vaguely the same as the Carver, but with a chance of dealing damage is increased to 50% rather than the 35% provided on the Carver. The higher chance obviously means a higher chance of dealing damage and therefore higher chance of additional healing. For legendary armour, there's a couple of choices. Firstly, you could use the Elven Cloak with resistance, which would reduce focus, poison and burn damage and grant additional focus, though my preference is the Mithril Coat with improved Shroud. The coat itself will grant lots of focus and also boost your army's defence to reduce incoming damage. Improved Shroud is also a better effect than most think, as you'll have a chance to avoid damage until the first round of attacks coming from your units, and as Gandalf is slow, this potentially means you could avoid 2 instances of damage coming from your opponents. I'll do more on this later. For headgear, again there is a few choices. The Grey Wizard Hat is an excellent item, as it grants additional focus as well as additional HP to your men and elf units. And if you get one with the Tranquility effect, it can provide yet more healing every 3 rounds, as well as removing any debuffs inflicted on your commander. I also like the Swan Helm with the Resolve or Fortitude of Men. Resolve of Men provides potential stun immunity, and Fortitude to Men a potential damage reduction to what's received by your men units. So if you're going to use men troop builds, this item is very, very good. Lastly, for a legendary accessory, there's a fairly wide choice, though I would say the sustained worn out smoking pipe is still an excellent choice, and I would definitely recommend this unless you can get very well upgraded legendary gear. If you insist on a legendary item, I would go for the fine smoking pipe with critical care for a focus boost and healing, though less than the ward out pipe boost. Or you could go with the Lothlorien belt with either wound treatment or iron guard. Wound treatment increases the healing you receive from your other healing items and skills, whereas guard provides an additional heal to melee units every round. Onwards to troop compositions. Now the main purpose of this build was to reduce troop losses when taking AI tiles, so obviously at the beginning of your season, which is when you'll probably be using this, you will be limited on what troops you can supply. Obviously in this case, just provide Gandalf with whatever troops you can and whatever you have available. However, the following troop builds are available for later in the season, so when you look to take stronger tiles and you have more troop variety available, look to use one of these builds that I recommend. Firstly is a generic build. This build is deliberately made up of non-cavalry units, so the units are cheaper on resources and faster to conscript. Sharpshooters are excellent with Gandalf, as their bonus damage skill comes in the early rounds when Gandalf is stunning or avoiding their attacks. So this can help press home your early advantage, as your sharpshooters will stay alive for the first few rounds and just inflict maximum damage. Sentinels are the best damage dealer ranged unit you can get throughout the fight and also provide bonus evasion, and the guards of the tower are just a melee tank to try and keep damage away from your squishy ranged units. Second up, we have a build under the similar kind of philosophy damage wise. However, this time we have cavalry builds. Firstly is a full cavalry build, which is going to use cataphracts, bow knights and cavaliers. If you're either Gondor or Rohan, you can sub out the cataphracts for swan knights or cavaliers for marshals if you wish. This set makes use of, albeit expensive, but extremely strong cavalry units to maximise Gandalf's effectiveness. The Cavaliers or the Marshals will provide a similar kind of substance to the Sharpshooters, and they'll hit hard and they'll hit in the early rounds when Gandalf is stunning, and the Bow Knights deal huge damage. The Cataphracts or Swan Knights are there just to be your tank unit and soak up most of the damage. So obviously Swans are very, very useful here because they'll stop your Cavaliers from losing units in later rounds. The second cavalry build is a slight variation on this, which is to sub out the Cavaliers for Sentinels. This is situational upon the opponent you face. However, over the course of a whole battle, I will find that the Sentinels deal a lot more damage than the Cavaliers do. However, you lose that early burst of damage. My last build is a fun build that I've toyed with if you play as LOTR. I would use March Wardens and Sentinels, as when combined they offer superb damage output from the range, whilst you use the Eagles as your tank units. Whilst they're weaker than Cataphracts, so obviously will die more regularly, they have superb speed, so it'll allow Gandalf to move from tile to tile significantly faster. This will stop you getting bounced potentially by opposition armies, which anyone who's used Gandalf the Grey before will know he's incredibly slow and is a common occurrence. So I find this build extremely fun, though it is a little bit more squishy and therefore you'll lose more units than the prior builds recommended. The end result is a commander who has amazing survivability, with stuns, evasion and healing aplenty to reduce damage losses. Gandalf should always be your initial commander when starting a new season to make sure that you keep troop numbers up and minimise losses. And with these builds, you can maximise your advantage. To show this, I'm going to move away from the usual PvP demo, as obviously that's not what this is for, and I'll just show two reports where you can see I fully defeat a 200 power tile in one shot whilst losing a very minimal number of troops. So you'll see this just shows that you can move around the battlefield and just take these tiles aplenty with Gandalf without having to reinforce every time and just make your life a million times easier. And on that note, that's everything I have to show you. I really hope you've enjoyed this, and I really hope this helps those of you struggling build a good early game Gandalf the Grey build. If you've enjoyed this video, please do drop a like and consider subscribing to see more commander builds and more informative videos from me in the future. On that note, I've been HJW Gaming, and I hope to see you on the next one.